Okay, let's get on to part lecture 2. Okay, the cardiac muscle and conduction. When we talk about the electrical aspects of the heart, the conduction system, a little bit about heart muscle cells, and a little bit about metabolism. So we say that the heart is autorhythmic. That is, it beats all by itself. It is entrained by nerves, but it has what's called a myogenic pacemaker. It's really up on the upper dorsal part of the right atrium. And it's myogenic because it comes from the heart itself. The heart has leaky sodium ion channels, and they spontaneously leak, and will spontaneously bring heart muscle cells to a threshold and cause an action potential to be generated, and then a contraction to ensue from that. So really, you have to look at two different things: the electrical aspects of the heart that lead to the contractile aspects of the heart. Remember, heart muscle, as again, any muscle, is excitable tissue. Just like nerves, it generates and conducts action potential. And your heart is innervated by both parts of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch. And if you actually cut all the nerves that lead to your heart would actually speed up. Your heart is held around 70 beats per minute, around there as an average, mostly by the parasympathetic nervous system. Your natural rhythm is like 100 beats per minute. Okay. Cardiac muscle cells. There's actually two types. These are called cardiocytes. There's conductive cardiocytes and contractile cardiocytes. The conductive cardiocytes, they don't really generate force. They just conduct action potentials. The contractile cardiocytes, they also conduct action potentials, but they contract and they generate force. And we're going to learn later on when we get into more detail about the electrical aspects of these cells. We'll find out that the action potential in the conductive cardiocytes is quite different than the action potential in the contractile cardiocytes. And if you get down to shape, how long it lasts, and what ion channels they use. All right. Remember, heart muscle cells are connected by intercalated discs. And in those intercalated discs are desmosomes, which are like spot wells that hold the cells together so they don't rip apart when they contract, and gap junctions, which are essentially electrical synapses. They're direct connection between the sarcoplasm of one heart muscle cell and the sarcoplasm of its adjoining heart muscle cell. So ions can flow directly between two heart muscle cells through the gap junctions. So they're electrically connected to each other. It's not a nervous connection, but it's still an electrical connection. Okay, first, what do cardiocytes look like? They're branched and uninucleate. All right, they're striated, and they have really the same arrangement of synaptic filaments as in skeletal muscle, and they have sarcomeres. But unlike skeletal muscle cells, which are long and cylindrical, they are short and branched. And different from skeletal muscle cells are multinucleate. Cardiac cytes are uninucleate. They have one nucleus, right? And essentially no satellite cells. Now, when you grow up, when you're a little kid, your heart grows and makes new cells. Once you reach adulthood, that's it. You're not going to have any more, you're not going to make any new heart muscle cells. If you exercise and your heart gets larger and stronger, not because you added cells, it's because you made larger, stronger cells. Okay. And again, it's striated muscle, just like skeletal muscle. But if you look at, we can look at the internal anatomy of cardiac muscle cells is quite different from skeletal. Let's go to here. Yeah, so here is the internal anatomy. See on top left, I was trying to look at pointer, but it won't work on this. Okay. So they're shorter, they're branched, they have the sarcomeres, they have transverse tubules, they have a sarcoplasmic reticulum, but it's much less produced than in skeletal muscle. So skeletal muscle has an internal calcium store, sarcoplasmic reticulum. And there isn't any calcium that comes in from the outside. Cardiac muscle is quite different. Cardiac muscle, and remember, calcium is a trigger, but like all muscle contraction. But the skeletal muscle is an internal calcium store in a sarcoplasmic reticulum. There is a sarcoplasmic reticulum, and as I mentioned, in skeletal muscle, it's much less smaller. And actually, the trigger for most of the calcium that triggers a cardiac conduction comes from the outside. Interstitial fluid and flows into the cardiac cells. That's one of the reasons why your calcium concentration in your blood, in your interstitial fluid in your blood is so important. Because we're going to see that the more calcium comes into your heart, the stronger the resulting contraction. So that's one of the big reasons why calcium is a homeostatic. Calcium concentration of your precious body fluids is a homeostatic variable. Okay. And also, one thing about cardiac muscle is it got lots and lots of mitochondria. It's really aerobic tissue, very aerobic, and very dependent upon oxygen. Oxygen has almost no anaerobic capability. Now, some skeletal muscles are very aerobic also. You know, the slow twitch muscle, for example, in your back. But then there are some skeletal muscles that the white fibers, they're very few mitochondria, and they depend mostly upon anaerobic metabolism, and mostly your arm muscles, but not heart muscle. It's almost completely aerobic. And here you have pictures of the catalytic disc, with the desmosome, the gap junctions. And so that's where, and notice the sarcomeres on the lower left, same thing as in skeleton. Okay, Z disc, I bands, H jones, A bands. All right. So as I mentioned, I've already mentioned this, metabolism almost totally anaerobic, right? Very dependent upon the oxygen supply. But it's versatile in its use of different fuels. It can fuel itself with glucose from glycogen or from fats. In fact, it actually kind of prefers fats. So it can use either, because sometimes, for example, red white fibers in skeletal muscle, they really can't use fat. They're anaerobic and they have to use glycogen. But heart muscle doesn't really care. It can use amino acids too. It can use all different kinds of fuels. Very susceptible to failure in ischemic conditions. Ischemic means low oxygen. Very, like I said, very sensitive to oxygen concentration. The heart muscle cells die really quickly if they're deprived of oxygen. The fiber skeleton. Again, it's regular connective tissue, structural support, and electrical insulation. we're going to see that we have to electrically isolate the atria from the ventricles. And this is because, think about this, this is for the sophistication of the heart. When we have the part where the great vessels leave the heart, it's called the base of the heart. And actually it's called base, but it's actually superior. The apex of the heart is the point made by the ventricles. It is inferior to the base. And the atria are up near the base, and the great vessels come in superiorly and make the atria contract and push blood inferiorly into the ventricles. Right? But then the ventricles have to pump in the opposite direction. They have to pump up this way into the great vessels. So atria is pumped this way, ventricles pump this way. So you have to have, so you can't let the electrical stimulation leak from the atria into the ventricles, because the ventricles will pump in the wrong direction. There's one electrical connection between the atria and the ventricles, the bundle, or the atrioventricular bundle. And we're going to see that in a moment when I show you the conduction system of the heart. Well, there's the cross section. You can see the four valves and the twisted nature of the cardiac muscle bundles, the spiral arrangement of cardiac muscle that cause contraction this way first, and then in this way. Okay, interesting, they are coronary blood vessels. They intermittently flow. Their blood can only flow through them when the heart is relaxed, or diastole. When the heart is contracted, these blood vessels are squeezed, and they're not pumping any blood. There's no blood flowing through them. But most of the time, your heart is in diastole. It's diastole, and therefore it's getting blood. The conduction system. I'm going to name the parts now, and then I'll show you a diagram of it, and then when we end this particular lecture. These are conductive cardiocytes. All right, so here's the thing: the sinoatrial node is called the pacemaker, and it is dorsal superior in the right ventricle. It's got the fastest natural rhythm, so it sets the pace. It's the pacemaker. It's called the SA node. Once it fires, the exponential travels through the atrium via gap junctions through the contractile cardiocytes of the atrium. And this exponential causes contraction of the atrium, so atrial systole. Okay. In the base of the heart, right at the top of the ventricles, is called the atrioventricular node. The exponential reaches the AV node from the SA node and has about a tenth of a second delay. It's actually to allow the atria to finish pumping blood into the ventricles. And then the AV node fires, sends the exponential into what's called the atrioventricular bundle or bundle of His, and then this travels through what's called the bundle branches. I kind of left that out. Through the atrioventricular bundle and bundle branches, and travels in the interventricular septum between the ventricles, and it's electrically isolated from the ventricles. Then it spreads out from the apex of the heart in the Purkinje fibers. And then the Purkinje fibers stimulate the contractile cardiocytes in the apex of the heart to fire an exponential and contract. And then the wave of the exponentials comes up the ventricles and causes a wave of contraction and pushes blood in this direction. And that past the Purkinje fibers, the exponentials travel into the contractile cardiocytes through gap junctions again. Right? Okay. And then a contraction ensues. So remember, this conduction system is all the electrical activity in the heart, and then that leads to a contraction of the heart. So that electrical and mechanical actions of the heart. And those are through the contractile cardiocytes. They generate the force that pumps blood out of the heart, or from the atria to the ventricles and out of the heart. So, what controls your heart rate? Well, the cardiac center in the medulla oblongata. There's a cardioinhibitory center that's parasympathetic. It influences just the heart rate, and this slows your heart rate down. Remember, the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest system, so it sets you up for inactivity. So it slows your heart rate down. There's a cardiac acceleratory center right next to it in the medulla oblongata. Sympathetic influences heart rate and strength of contraction. So it's the fight or flight. So it increases heart rate and increases the strength of contraction of the heart. And the impulse center, what tells your heart which one gets fired? So both are kind of active all the time. Remember that both parts of your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are active all the time. Just how active are they? Is it more sympathetic or more parasympathetic? And this is inputs of these centers are chemoreceptors and baroreceptors. Chemoreceptors in the aorta and the carotid bodies up here. Baroreceptors in those places also. And an atrial reflex that the more you stretch, cardiac muscles like smooth muscle in the sense that the more you stretch it, the greater the resulting contraction. And we're going to look at there's inputs of sensors also later on. Okay. So nerve supply, cardiac muscles are innervated by the sympathetic nervous system, post-ganglionic fibers leading from upper thoracic signals to the spinal cord, cardiac plexus of the mediastinum, cardiac nerves to SA and AV nodes. Parasympathetic. This is along a preganglionic fiber in the vagus nerve, and the postganglionic fibers from ganglia and myocardium innervates the SA and AV nodes, but does not innervate the actual heart muscle. Sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system actually does innervate some regular contractile cardiac muscle. Okay. Here is the system, synovial on top, synovial node, superior dorsal right atrium, it fires off, the exponential travels through the right atrium to the AV node via gap junctions. At the AV node, 10th per second delay, then that AV node fires, sends the exponential down the bundle of his, or atrioventricular bundles, to right that bundle branches, to the ventricular septum, out to the apex, along the Purkinje fibers, and causes a contraction of the ventricles from the inferior to superior. That's a conduction system. Then below, we have the sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation of the heart. In purple is sympathetic, cardiac acceleratory center sends nerve signals along sympathetic nerves down the spinal cord, leaves the spinal cord, enters the sympathetic chain ganglia, where the postganglionic motor neurons. You gotta remember the anatomy of the autonomic nervous system that we did in lab last semester. And then the postganglionic fiber goes out, innervates the AV node, SA node, and the heart muscle itself. So it affects heart rate and strength of contraction because it allows more calcium ions to come in. The green is the parasympathetic a branch of the autonomic nervous system, notice that it leaves from nuclei in the medulla oblongata out by the vagus nerve. And this is a long, the pre-vague fiber, remember, is long in the parasympathetic nervous system, goes through a ganglia right on the surface of the heart, and innervates the SA node and the AV node. And it will slow the heart rate down. So it just affects heart rate only, whereas the sympathetic nervous system affects both heart rate and strength of contraction. And on that note, I think we're going to call it and stop Heart Lecture 2, and then pick it up later on. So again, so long for now.